Anyone that couldn't tell this before has realized, after the eruption of the health crisis, that the global elites are behind everything that upholds the current system. They influence every major decision in our society. They have control of every mainstream media narrative. They can decide the fate of every new crisis, but their main goal is to find a way to rule all of us without making people realize what they're actually doing. The elites are coming up with a plan for a new way of life, in which everyone will have everything, but people will own nothing. In their dirty little utopia, we won't be able to make our own decisions. We will be constantly surveilled, and the worst part is that they will try to make it look as if this is our own choice. They need us to accept that new system in order to take control over our lives. Even though this may sound too out of the box for some people, it is happening, and with each new crisis, they find subtle ways to make this transition without us noticing. The elites know it is counterproductive to just attack us and take all we have. They need the people to keep the system running. And it's safe to say that the world population would react and bring about a lot of chaos and unrest once people realized their liberties were being stolen. But the elites are tricky, and they're incredibly smart. To overcome that obstacle, they actually don't have to do much. They don't even need to take anything from us to implement their goals. At this point, all they have to do is watch our incompetent governments destroying our currency and collapsing the value of our money, and do nothing. If our money becomes some worthless paper, people will start falling into poverty, and that would be enough to bend us over and make us accept their new, generous, and revolutionary rescue plan. Without money and personal wealth, we lose our independence. We will need help, and the elites will appear as martyrs trying to save us from the mess our leaders created. They will make us believe that we live freely in an abundant society. Eventually, people will own virtually nothing, and they will be okay with that. Well, at least until they realize they've fallen victim to a tyrannical system. But that's a whole other discussion. For now, we will focus on the tools the elites currently use to achieve their utopia. And if you think inflation talk is boring, just wait until you see how higher prices and a debased currency will become the gateway for an authoritarian system. That's unless the entire Western society doesn't completely and utterly collapse way before we ever get a chance of living a dystopian nightmare. Yep, possibilities are not great, but this is where we're at now. Today, inflation is the main issue plaguing most economies around the planet, and this crisis will likely linger for several years. Some say we will see the worst out of it in 2022. By now, there is nothing politicians can say to deny what is going on. In fact, even Vice President Kamala Harris has acknowledged that inflation is making the lives of millions of families much harder. Last Friday, during an interview, when the vice president was asked about the surge in U.S. consumer prices, which have accelerated at the fastest annual pace in more than 30 years, Harris said prices have gone up. Families and individuals are dealing with the realities that the bread costs more, the gas costs more, and have to understand what that means, she said. That's about the cost of living going up. That's about having to stress and stretch limited resources. She added that inflation is a source of stress for families. That is not only economic, but is, on a daily level, something that is a heavy weight to carry. Harris continued by arguing that historically, when prices go up, it has a direct impact on the quality of life for all people in our country. Now, sadly, but not surprisingly, her solution to this issue will fix nothing. She supposedly believes that the new administration's agenda and the passing of new spending plans will help to balance things out. But we all know that couldn't be further from the truth. All of that spending will inevitably create even more inflation. Of course, the mainstream media is also trying to flip this narrative around and put a positive spin on the inflation crisis. In fact, last week, MSNBC attempted the ultimate gaslighting by affirming that the inflation we're seeing now is a good thing, in an article whose link was posted on Twitter. Needless to say, that sparked major backlash, and the tweet was deleted right after. This week, NBC reporter Stephanie Ruhle said during an interview that nobody knows exactly when prices are going down, but people shouldn't sweat the soaring cost of living America. Because when you put all this in perspective, inflation is not a problem, since we all have more money to spend these days. Well, she can speak for herself. Because, as we reported yesterday, inflation is rising much faster than our paychecks are, which means that our standard of living is collapsing very rapidly. With each passing week, the price of everything gets higher and higher, while our purchasing power significantly declines. Consumers are getting increasingly frustrated with this situation. That's why the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index just hit the lowest level in nearly a decade. This month, consumer confidence dropped to the lowest level since 2011, as inflation climbed to the highest level since the early 1990s, going against policymakers' repeated affirmation that the current surge of price increases is temporary. The index tumbled to 66.8 for November, well below the Dow Jones estimate of 72.5. In October, the reading was 71.7, meaning that November level represented a 6.8% collapse. Now, if you're among those who are losing confidence in the economy, just wait a couple more months, and you'll see that things will be far worse. Even Fed Chair Neel Kashkari is publicly admitting that inflation will continue to soar in the coming months. Last Sunday, during an appearance on CBS's Face the Nation, he said that the U.S. will likely see higher readings before numbers taper off. The challenge is that these high prices that families are paying, those are real, and people are experiencing that pain right now, Kashkari added. The truth is that the Federal Reserve has lost control over its own policies, and 2022 will be a very chaotic year from an economic standpoint. Just imagine what will happen when gasoline prices soar above $5 per gallon all across the country. Already, the average price of a gallon of gasoline in some states, such as California, is nearing this mark. Over the weekend, gas prices hit an average of $4.676 in California, beating its previous record average price of $4.671 for regular gasoline set in October 2012, according to AAA. In some areas, including Northern California's Humboldt County, prices are pushing $5. On Monday, the average price was $4.97, and across the Bay Area, gasoline prices surged to more than $4.85. Industry specialists say that this upward trend will persist well into 2022. And that's really bad news, given that pretty much everything we buy has to be transported, and increased transportation costs are translated into higher inflation. Unfortunately, those at the bottom of the economic food chain will suffer the most. With food prices jumping to record levels, food banks are receiving considerably fewer donations, and many of them are already reportedly struggling to purchase enough food because price hikes have been sharper than expected. According to Katie Fitzgerald, the COO of Feeding America, a nonprofit organization that operates more than 200 food banks across the country, her network of food banks is already stretched thin due to the unprecedented demand spurred by the health crisis-induced downturn in the economy last year. She warned that it has become more difficult for the organization to absorb food inflation, resulting in fewer families being fed this holiday season. Fitzgerald highlighted that soaring food inflation is an insult to injury for families who depend on food banks, and a lot of people are just saying they can't afford food, added Jason Bautista, the charity's event manager. The reality in which millions of working poor Americans live is getting even harder. Inflation is crushing their budgets as they can barely afford to survive. To make things worse, food prices are expected to get even more expensive as the cost of equipment for food production faces a meteoric rise. According to one index, the price of used farm equipment soared by 22% during the first 9 months of 2021, and it's poised to make its biggest gains yet in the fourth quarter. U.S. farmers argue that the current market has ingredients fueling inflation in industries like cars and TVs, soaring demand from cash-flush buyers, the semiconductor shortage, congested ports and rails, with the added irritant of the labor stoppage at the world's largest farm machine maker. Many problems are converging and simultaneously aggravating right now. That's why so many people use the term perfect storm to describe the current state of affairs. Those who are still waiting for things to get back to normal are going to be bitterly disappointed. As the economic analyst M.N. Gordon has recently noted, the price inflation that's underway is not transitory at all, rather it's permanent. In fact, we believe a long-term mass repricing of materials, goods and services is now taking place. Pre-2020 prices, much like pre-1965 prices, are gone forever. Deficits of $5.9 trillion over the 24 months ending September 30th, 2021, and a Fed balance sheet expansion of nearly $5 trillion over the same period have irrevocably damaged the entire pricing structure of the financial system and the economy. Price inflation is on the move. Reality can no longer be covered up with Washington's lies. We expect this episode of inflation will be one for the history books. Indeed, it is safe to say that this crisis will mark the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. We wish we could tell you that life will get better from now on, but that's simply unrealistic. Every time a major systemic change started to happen in the world, things always ended in disaster. And it seems that now it is our turn. Thank you very much for watching. If you found this video informative, we strongly recommend you to check out 7-Year Apocalypse, the book written by the fine economist, Mr. Michael Snyder. Please keep tuned to our channel to stay updated with future videos. Here's to the next bulletin.